Hello, this is Ken Segal. I'm a partner and head of the Business Advisory Services group here at LGA. And I have the profound privilege of having my friend and client, Josh Beck, Chief Investment Officer of BCI Technology Investments, here to talk today about what's happening in our global supply chain. Josh, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me here, Ken.
So I'd love to kick off by you just kind of summarizing your experience in the space and why your expertise is so profoundly unique and worthwhile for what we're trying to do here today.
Yeah, appreciate that. So I've been working in and out of Eastern Asia and Greater China for about 15 years. I've done a number of mergers and acquisitions. My specialty was in a lot of international technical project management. So I've worked in hundreds of different Chinese manufacturing operations. For many years, I had a HACCP certification, which allowed me to get in there and do quality assurance audits of medical devices and a variety of other supply chain issues. So I've done over 80 different quality audits on the ISO side, getting into vendor selection and competitively quoting. So understanding what that is. I've done work with Cisco systems and a variety of other Fortune 500s throughout East Asia as well. And one of the things that's always so amazing to me is that, for as much bluster that we hear between the US and the Chinese trade relationships on the governmental side, it's actually pretty remarkable how similar Chinese and businesses operate. There's actually, if you think of it at a macro perspective, there's actually a highly functioning relationship. I'm not sure how many LGA clients work with different French companies or maybe Saudi Arabian companies, and there's distinct cultural worlds in terms of being able to process documentation and kind of getting back to you and just communication flow. So at a high level, the relationship, I think, on the commercial level is still fairly strong, but it's been certainly interesting to see the changes in the climate over the last 24 months.
Well, it's a global situation. I agree. So I guess to bring it down to its most basic levels, what is the supply chain disruption and kind of what's its impact? It's all of a sudden come in the news in the last couple of years, and we used to take a lot of things for granted, but what's going on?
Yeah, so the supply chain disruption, I think, started and it was born out of the US-China trade war. So we had a lot of kind of tariffs go into place, and then prevailing tariffs that kind of countered those tariffs. So then it kind of escalated into a lot of different industries, from steel to raw commodities to grains and it really it impacted the American farmers pretty disproportionately, particularly in the early days of the trade war. That piggybacked right on top of COVID, which, you had a lot of the large freight forwarders and shipping lines around the world anticipating that there would be a massive constriction of demand with people not being able to go out and countries on quarantine. They also had massive staffing problems and policy issues regarding worker safety. So then they pulled massive parts of their fleets off the water. And I think that what they did was they took a page out of the kind of the robber barons of the 1800s here in the US, and whenever things returned to normal, or it was very clear that there was demand, they said, we'll just put less boats out on the water and charge a higher rates, and we'll have less overhead cost and more margin. So I think that we've seen some pretty large actions, like, for example, the Koreans have moved forward with nationalizing a fleet of shipping vessels so that they've never been caught kind of stranded by a commercial company when it comes to getting goods that affect their GDP so heavily. So as this has kind of escalated, the supply chain disruption is kind of almost like, think of it as almost tsunami waves. The first wave was the trade war, which proved the supply chain proved pretty resilient, but started to force a little bit of more of an onshoring manufacturing trend in the United States to kind of buffer risk. That second tsunami wave kind of came in the form of COVID and shipping lines actually kind of constricting demand on that side. The third wave was really on the COVID side in terms of worker availability. Now, I think that everyone thinks that maybe it's the problem that they just can't staff factories around the world. No, actually, the operations in Greater Asia are pretty much back to normal. Certainly they're having issues with COVID outbreaks, but there's much more stringent controls there that kind of document that. The real bottleneck has been on the shipping logistics side. So, Port of Los Angeles, getting through the Longshoremen's Union, getting through the trucking fleets. I talked to the CEO of a major trucking company here in the United States recently. He said he's got 18% of his trucks parked because he can't find certified truck drivers, right? So then we're running into actually a lot more internal supply chain disruptions in the United States than we are actually seeing macro global supply chain disruptions that are kind of affecting things. So a lot of that's policy driven, a lot of that is workforce driven here.
So what you're saying is that even without COVID, this was kind of trending in that direction anyways, which is interesting. I always thought it was the perfect storm, but you're saying the wheels were already in motion before COVID with the trade war.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that the pendulum has swung, really back into employers needing to provide higher wages and bigger benefits. And we're seeing those sign-in bonuses, particularly with truck driving and heavy manufacturing jobs and those type of things kind of coming back. And that was part of a larger onshoring trend, but certainly it kicked it into high gear. It went from second gear into fifth gear with the emergence of COVID.
But with the increase in shipping costs that everyone is talking about, wouldn't you think that higher margin business where people are paying top dollar for shipping would create that opportunity to get the requisite bodies to do the right jobs to get things moving?
You would think so, except we are not seeing the pain threshold be met by a lot of these global nationals in order to appropriately compensate workers for the risk or appropriately provide benefits around it, move away from a 1099 structure and get into full-time employment with pension plans and 401ks and those type of things. So I think that what we're seeing is a moment in time where workers are saying, no, it's still not enough. I need more. And we've got a lot of corporate CEOs kind of looking at the bottom line. They're looking at their inflationary pressures. They're looking at a variety of kind of macroeconomic indicators. And they're saying that, yeah, boy, I don't feel comfortable doubling people's salaries in this environment. That's in particularly publicly traded companies. It's a hard pill to swallow, and I think that we have not hit the correct pain threshold. So from that perspective, going to restaurants, and wondering like, my gosh, why is it so hard to find a waiter here? Or going to the airport and be like, does it really take an hour to get a cup of coffee, right? Those type of things. I don't see that getting better anytime soon because a lot of the corporations have not hit that pain point yet.
So all the potential labor force is still sitting on the sidelines.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, very, very much so.
That's amazing. So I guess then with COVID potentially subsiding, does that mean that this is going to start making things improve?
Yeah, I think so. It's really going to depend what the COVID outlooks like come the summer. Particularly, I think that a lot of economists are projecting that people will already have had COVID or are vaccinated or are just plain willing to take the risks and be out, right? So then they're thinking that by the time we get into the summer, people are going to be traveling more. Hotel prices are already going up significantly. That's one of the areas that's seeing significant inflationary pressure. Gasoline, all the things around kind of that transit economy, around vacation economy. We're really seeing a lot of the inflationary pressure there, particularly around gasoline. I think we've seen a 50% rise over the last 12-month period or something like that. So a lot of people are predicting it will. I think that whenever it comes to getting our goods from Amazon and on the consumer goods side, we're going to continue to see international supply chain delays. Although Barron's is just reporting yesterday that container costs have fallen by 30% since the highs in October, and that the empty containers are actually getting shipped out of the Port of Los Angeles about 40% faster than they were at that same time. So there are indicators that the levers that are being pulled by the California government and the federal government and by the longshoreman union, that they are really having a major effect in kind of clearing out that traffic. But I know that it's the inland freight. It's actually on the trucking side where we're continuing to see quite significant bottlenecks.
Wow. So then the market essentially is going to drive things to normal, whatever normal is. So that's a function of the boats out to sea, coming in, getting processed at the ports, and then also finding the labor to have that right inflection point to get them to start delivering the goods. That's So with all those different effects that have started this whole chain of events, what should we be looking for as the first signs of things returning to normal?
Well, I'd say, you look at the big importer of goods. I'd say if you're looking at their public publicly listed stock, right? For example, whenever you're looking at their net sales or their imports, their top line revenue for on a quarterly basis, not so much on their net profits, right? Because it's hard to tell in this environment if they're swallowing or passing on costs. But if you're looking at their net revenues on a quarterly basis, then you'll be able to see what's happening to the supply chain kind of like at a tangential level. I think that the big boys are really important. For example, General Motors and Ford, right? Like they are actually taking a lot of disproportionate space on a lot of vessels, right? So, so the reason I say look at what the big players are doing and how their stocks are floating is because they're actually getting a bigger piece of the pie in this equation, right? Like the smaller companies that were more nimble and agile, I think had a significant advantage within the trade war period, right? But then the way that COVID has dragged on, it's put a lot of those balance sheets in stressful positions, right? And that's going to create its own buying opportunities on the stock market and in investment cycles. But then whenever it comes to actual execution and who's actually booking the space on the freight liners, it's going to be the larger companies who are actually forcing their way in and say, no, you're going to give me more space because I'm a major customer. So we're seeing a little bit, and they've got more of that, balance sheet where they can weather this long, they can have a boat stuck out there for 5 months where a smaller company might not be able to do that. So I'd say that's a good kind of macro indicator. Look at the grocery store shelves. I think that's going to tell you a lot about the U.S. supply chain in particular and how that's doing on the domestic freight side. The other thing that could be interesting is that when you're at the grocery store, pick up something and see if it's local. You might actually see a trend where things are a lot more local than they used to be. You're not getting your lettuce from Yuma, Arizona anymore. It came from a greenhouse that's in your own state. So we might be seeing more of that on the agricultural side. And certainly I'd say that I'd be watching the federal government, not only on the interest rate side, but then also on what happens on some of the farm bill side and this kind of consolidation of meat packing and processing. There's some kind of almost monopoly trust busting that's kind of on the verge of happening there. So all those things are massively going to impact what supply chains look like in the coming 6 to 9 months.
Now, one last question I had was with respect to how the product's being made overseas, is it safe to say that the labor capacity is approaching normal in a lot of the Asian manufacturing plants? So at least the product is going to be able to be produced, notwithstanding the ability to ship it, but at least the widgets and finished goods that people need, or at least that whole production side is starting to pick up.
Yeah, it definitely is. What we're seeing is production is back to normal. And quite honestly, there's such a backlog of work that it's been remarkable. From a GDP loss perspective, I'm not sure we lost a lot of income, but we sure saw a lot of projects and a lot of work get pushed out. So a lot of manufacturers are at or past capacity. A lot of them are having, think of your Asian manufacturing partners of really thinking like, boy, should I be adding CapEx now? How long is this run going to last? But a lot of them are actually turning down work. What we're actually seeing is I would say that it's probably 90% back to business as usual. The difference being is you're going to see a massive change in payment terms, right? So there's so much work available at the moment that Asian manufacturer, who would have been previously happy to give you net 30, 60, 90s is going to now say, hey, listen, I'm going to want the money before it leaves my factory. And I don't need to finance your stuff because if you don't want your stuff, someone will fill that machine time for me tomorrow. And so then, everyone should be very mindful of that. It definitely is going to drive up some costs on our purchase products here in the United States.
So crystal ball, when will things back to normal, whatever the heck normal means? Is it 90 days, 6 months, 6 years?
I think that we're in the process of structuring a new normal. I think that throughout 2021 and 2022, there's a massive initiative to onshore a lot of manufacturing. And that's everything from, the PPP PP mask that we all wear to just simple consumables to industrial goods. So we're seeing that happening across the United States as a massive trend. That takes time, right? We're talking about moving heavy equipment around the world, turning brownfield sites into brand new, modern facilities, getting robotic welding machines and those type of things into these industrial activities. I think that, we're going to see a new normal probably really start to appear in Q3, Q4 this year. And it's going to look a lot more, I think, American or North American based on the manufacturing side. But it's always going to have tentacles in East Asia. We now have inseparable supply chains and economies. So it's all important that that's always going to be an aspect of it. But people have to de-risk. The corporations have to be able to de-risk the ability to supply. So we'll see a lot more American manufacturing jobs out of this, I think.
Well, that's awesome. Well, Josh, this has been truly informative, and this has been an awesome experience for me. I'm sure it will be for our viewers as well. But thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, Josh.
Thank you, Ken.
My pleasure. Thank you.